In this episode of the van conversion, I'm going to be taking it from this rather spaceship-esque looking interior to an area that looks somewhat habitable. You can expect to see plenty of confusion.
How are you meant to do it?
Questioning of life choices.
It was always going to be a squeeze, but wow.
And of course, injuries. Oh, that's sharp. We got lots to cover in this episode, so let's get into it. So the primary goal in this episode is to get this hollow Soffit cladding installed, but we've got 3 steps to complete before that, the first of which is laying the vinyl floor. This stuff is a lovely wood effect. Well, I'm hoping it's lovely. I haven't actually opened it up yet, but I'm hoping it's going to give some nice kind of warm tones to the inside of this van. Seeing as the walkways in this van are so narrow, this flooring is going to have very concentrated areas of wear, and so I splashed out on a high quality vinyl that I was confident would stand the test of time. The thing I didn't account for, however, was that the extra thickness would make it difficult to conform to the curves within the van prior to cutting.
I think I've already trimmed too much. Pillock.
By the way, I've put links to all of the materials and tools I'm using in this video in the description below, and so if you want more information on something, that's where you'll find it.
Blimey, that was actually quite difficult. A lot more difficult than other people made it look, I must say. I guess start from down there and work our way back.
Considering this was my first time laying vinyl, this actually went surprisingly well, and so if you want to learn more about my process, you can check out the extended series which is linked in the top corner or the description below. And so with the vinyl done, next I can move on to carpeting.
This up here is a 3-way stretch carpet, and so in areas like this where there's these weird curves going on, we're going to line areas like this with the carpet so that one side of it will be tucked under this bit of gasket trim, whatever that thing is, and then the other side of the carpet will come out here, probably finish around here somewhere, and will be covered once we get the solid boards in.
But before we get bogged down in this process, I'll just explain a slight oversight I had when approaching this step. This is a representation of one of the back doors of the van, and the current plan is to carpet the curved edge and then clad over the flat face with the cladding, and the plan was to just glue it in place. The problem is, behind this PVC is a vapor barrier, and that is simply spray adhesived onto the insulation and the door behind. And so by adhering the cladding to the vapor barrier, that bond is only as strong as the spray adhesive that is holding the vapor barrier to the door, and there's a high chance of it becoming loose over time. And so in this case, what I would need is some sort of mechanical fixing that goes through the PVC and into the metal door behind the vapor barrier. But I don't really like the look of this. I want to go for something a bit more discreet. And so my plan is to attach battens to the door first, put plenty of screws in, and then those battens will give me a solid fixed surface that I can then adhere the cladding onto. However, what this has now left me with is an exposed wooden edge. And so what I should have done here was do the battening first and then the carpeting. Alright, I've somehow got to do this area next.
How are you meant to do this? This is nuts.
You'll be seeing the full transformation of this bulkhead space in the next video, which will be focused on cabinetry and will likely display attention to detail like never seen before, at least when it comes to van conversions. And speaking of attention to detail, when installing these windows a couple of episodes ago, I really didn't like the look of these magnolia coloured frames that came with them, and so I opted to cover them in carpet too.
I'm scared about this. Don't spray the screen. Oh, I sprayed the screen. Oh, bugger.
I appreciate this is a little bit of a weird technique, and I'm sure many of you will have much to say about it, but it did actually end up working quite well. The carpet is ever so slightly folded over the back side of the frame, not so much to intrude on the mechanism, but just enough to provide a decent finished edge on there.
Alright, so the majority of the carpet is in. It's all tucked behind the gaskets and the seals and everything like that. However, there's a few locations where this is not possible, namely on the back doors and the side. All of the doors effectively. The carpet just kind of comes to an end. There's nothing to finish it off, and it looks a little bit untidy to my critical eye.
And so to address this issue, I purchased some of this rubber trim to adhere to the perimeter of the door, which would both protect and finish the edges of the carpet. It ended up being a right old pain in the arse to get into position, but the end result was definitely worth it, and it marks the point in which I can now move on to the battening and the stud work.
And so for the wall ribs, I've got these 2x1 battens that I've actually thicknessed down to be slightly thinner than 1 inch to give me extra room on the inside, and it also gave it a much clearer cleaner, less fluffy face that should be easier to work from.
This is where the forward planning of this project came into effect, and the 3D scan I previously got of the van really came into its own.
I think this might be about the only time that bendy timber is handy to have. And of course, the one time I need it, the majority of this stuff is bloody straight.
This app would allow me to find metal ribs of the van that were hidden under the vapor barrier that I could use to secure the battens into position, while also avoiding any mechanisms or wiring I had already routed through the van. This app is called Polycam 3D, details of which you can find in my video talking about how I designed this van.
Okay, so all the verticals are in position now. The next thing I need to do is start figuring out sort of how to put the horizontal dividers in certain places. And so to do this, I've purchased this bit of kit, which is called a pocket hole jig. And a lot of the woodworkers here might be interested to hear my position on these things, considering how shunned they usually are within the circles of woodworkers. My position on pocket hole jigs is do whatever the f you need to do to join two bits of wood together. I know that I like to over-engineer things, but it doesn't mean I don't see a time and place for these.
This was the perfect solution in retrofitting cross supports between these battens, as it prevented them from splitting had I just gone ahead and drove screws straight into it, which, trust me, I tried. This allowed me to think a bit more creatively about some additional features within the van, such as this cutout in the shower that can be used for shampoos and soaps and stuff, and some cutouts in the bedroom area.
All right, I think I'm getting carried away now, but seeing as under the bed here is going to be a garage area, what if not only do I have an indent up here for personal items like books and phones and stuff, but down here I have an indent for tools, more tools. I don't need this, but I'm going to do it. Like, imagine, come on, like wrenches, spanners, other mechanical tools that, you know, make it look like I know what I'm doing.
And so with all the battening done, now I could begin creating the stud wall for the shower.
And we're going to use those as sort of a reference to begin marking out where the studs are going to land on the floor.
I'm using 45mm square timber to create these stud walls, which brings up concerns about how much valuable floor space this takes up.
It was always going to be a squeeze, but wow, that's van life apparently.
The truth is, these stud walls are far from just being wasted space, because as you'll see later, they're going to be absolutely littered with services such as wires and pipes. And if they're not taken up with them, they'll likely include some sort of cutout for added storage, such as this nice little spice rack I'm building next to my hob, and this area next to the bed for, well, I don't know really, it's just going to be there.
Smashing. Little area for pooping here. Area for washing here.
So yeah, it's pretty plain to see the shower was the main trade-off when it came to floor space, but from what I've heard from people who live in vans, showers are actually seldom used due to the fact that nationwide gym memberships often mean a shower is within driving distance, and if you're in the wild somewhere, natural bodies of water create a great alternative. Anyway, next we're going to start looking at the curved walls in this van.
Okay, so the plan here is to put an accurate 45mm radius on the corner of this MDF. So this block, with its two pre-drilled holes, can go on the corner here, and I'm going to create a fence of some kind for that to go on. We're then going to get this block here, the clamp on the back, and that will hold it in position while we then get a flush trim cutter, so it's got a bearing at the bottom here, and that is going to follow the radius on the MDF below while cutting this to the final radius that we need.
In bespoke kitchens, curved sections like this are often made of MDF and then primed and sprayed to match the cabinets around them, but MDF is very heavy and I need to be as economical as possible when it comes to things like this. I've got some ideas as to how I might approach this, but I'm going to tackle those later on because I've got some bigger fish to fry at the moment, such as this stud wall that makes up one half of the wardrobe. This is going to be the main cavity that allows wires from the distribution board to travel around the van, such as those going across the roof and into the shower stud wall, and the various interfaces and displays I'm going to have in an overhead bedroom cabinet. Finally, I've got a small stud wall on the opposite side of the kitchen that will allow me to place power sockets next to the bench area.
Today, we're going to cover up months of work in the de-rusting, the insulation, the stud work, everything, because it's all going under a layer of cladding. Don't know about you, but I am really excited about this stage. So this is the cladding I am using. It's called hollow Soffit boards, and if I get to the end here, you can see that it's made from plastic. It has a hollow cavity in it, which firstly massively reduces the weight of this stuff compared to solid wood, and it will apparently provide an extra layer of insulation through the use of an air gap.
This is where you'll really begin to see my furniture making roots come into play, because I couldn't bear the thought of joining these end trims through any other means than miters, which probably made this process take 10 times longer than it otherwise should have. To do this, I had this angle measurer from Bosch that had a button on it which would bisect the measured angle. I could then take this to my miter saw, where I would use the laser to cast the required angle onto the trim before cutting it to size with a hacksaw and refining on a disc sander. I've since learnt that these trim tools exist, and so that might have sped the process up somewhat, but I found that using the miter saw just caused too much vibration when trying to cut this stuff, and I had the advantage of, when using the disc sander, I could slightly tilt the bed to create an undercut on the miter, which would ensure the front of the join would close up before the back. Alright, so I've got all the trim in place, and I'm now going to see if I can actually get some boards in here, because there really isn't much flex on this at all. I think with this one I should be able to slide it in from the end. Down here may be the same, but this whole wall is very much a test as to how I'm going to approach the rest of it. That was way more difficult than it needed to be. Okay, so this one is going to be slotting in here, but before I do that, I'm going to put some adhesive down here and also a pin on the tongue of this one at the top to give it sort of an extra point of whatchamaflip. I'm definitely doing it a different way next time. Just got blood on a first aid kit. Makes it look well used, doesn't it? Man, that cut deep. I'm by no means an expert on installing this stuff, and while I think an adhesive would be okay on its own for a static installation such as a house, there's going to be lots of vibration in this van that could shake things loose over time. Alright, so I'm going to start with here this time. The opposite wall ended up going much better, even though I wasn't able to pin it in as many locations as I'd hoped. In fact, it went so well that upon looking back at my original installation, I noticed that in my frantic panic trying to get the boards in place, I failed to align them with the window. I am absolutely gutted to say it, but I think I'm going to need to just rip this off and reattach it somehow. I'm going to try and salvage this as one panel. I'm really not feeling confident about it, but it's going to be one of those things that I just wish I did. So as much as I really want to carry on with the walls right now to further divide this space, I think I should probably get started on the ceiling, because then I can get all of this area done all the way down the middle there, and then whatever cabinets I put in here and cladding up these two walls, I can use to support it in as many areas as I can. So then it will have three methods of fixing: the adhesive, the nails or the pins in the tongue, and the walls holding it up. It shouldn't fall down on my head. Hopefully. I'll also have my head in there because I'm the height of the inside of this van. Yeah. But before even attaching the cladding to the ceiling, I had to figure out the location for the lights, because I needed to cut a small socket out of the insulation above in order to fit the lights themselves. And I think this is a good example as to what makes van conversions so difficult for novices, or at least people who aren't familiar with project management in building, for example, where you're used to having to do lots of different jobs all at once. My brain is jelly right now. So I think all of the wires along the roof are done. So we've got the lighting points pre-drilled, and I want these to land in the middle of one of these soffit boards, because it would look weird if the soffit board's slightly off center and the light sort of partially goes through this join, and you know, it's got to be there really. So the obvious solution to this is start with the soffit boards in the middle and then build out from there. But we've kind of already addressed this issue. If I were to do that and start with this soffit board in the middle, I can get a nail into the tongue here and then fix that into position. But if I try and slot the one on this side into position, I can't get a nail through that groove without going through this tongue as well. And so it's going to show in the final result. And so unfortunately what I need to do here is start from one side of the van, nailing these tongues as I go, and then hope that by the time I get to the middle, the lights line up perfectly with this center section. This is one of those things that if I get this slightly misaligned, you're going to be able to see it, and it will look terrible if I get it wrong. I started by cutting the soffit board to the distance between the two max fans on the ceiling, before then transferring the location of the light sockets onto the board itself. I could then drill out the light holes, soften the edges, before cutting an access hole that would allow me to thread the wire through the soffit board rather than above it. This would both protect the wires and also help me get past the metal roof ribs in the van. And then in a moment of genius, I realised I had all of these light stands at my disposal. And so I drilled a hole in a 2x4, mounted this to the top of the light stand, and then used those to press the soffit board into the ceiling, and then use it as a fixed datum point that I could start building out from. I was also able to get the front and back finishing trim in position, which would help me hold the soffit boards in position at either end, while I worked out the cutouts for the overhead cabinets and the wardrobe and all that. Right, so we've got the middle one, the one next to it, and the one next to it in position. I've got a few small adjustments to do with the vapor barrier behind the lighting, but other than that, the spacing looks pretty damn good. And so I need to start by fixing this first one in position and then work my way back from that to eventually fit the middle one, and then from there I can continue working my way along. The reason this far one isn't going all the way down is because I've got some overhead kitchen cabinets going in this area. Now I don't actually know where I need to cut this one off, and so I've left it oversized for now, so that later when I'm measuring up those cabinets I can just come in there with a multi-tool, cut it off, and then put some end trim on it to hide that area. And before I move these, I'm actually going to put a couple of screws right in the edge here to hold that up into one of the roof ribs, so that when I move these, this doesn't accidentally shift and then throw everything off. This is where the wooden roof ribs I installed earlier in the series would come into their own, because they were thick enough to allow me to use some big nails to fix this cladding into place, which in addition to the adhesive and trim I'm using to support it, will make this ceiling rock solid. Right, before I forget, get the silicone in there. That's landed pretty perfectly. I'm happy with that. Maybe like 2mm off, but considering that process, I think that is as good as we're gonna get. Yeah, that definitely wants some silicone. You can just about see between these two, there's that line. Just a little bit of silicone in there should hide that. With the middle board now fixed, the remainder of the ceiling was much easier to do because I could just fit it and pin it as I worked along. It's hard to say whether I got the process the right way round on this or not, and if I should have clad the ceiling before doing the stud work or not. The reason I went about things this way is because I had very, very specific places in which the wires had to run, and if I was just trailing them through the ceiling without the context of the stud work below, I don't think I could have got it as accurate as I needed to. Because trust me, I've designed this van to be so bespoke that the tolerances are just, they're so much finer than they should be, or what I imagine they should be for a project of this scale. All right, so next I want to start on these walls just to make it feel like I'm actually making some decent progress in here. So we've got some weird stuff going here because obviously I've got the overhead cabinets going on in the bedroom, and I need a way to finish off the soffit boards when they go into the corner here. So I'm gonna have to run this trim all the way up here, figure out what to do in this area, maybe even not bother putting an end cap on that because it's going to be hidden by the cabinets. And then I'm going to need another bit of end trim finishing it off up here before it goes into the curve. Now, as you'll remember with the windows, by putting the trim in position first, it made inserting the soffit boards almost impossible afterwards. The advantage to these walls is that they're tapered from top to bottom, and so I could put the trim in position all the way round and then simply slide the boards up to fit. So again, I'm going to have to work from top to bottom here so that I can pin the tongue sequentially, but I want the boards horizontal on here to line up with the boards along the window. So we're going to start by measuring that distance, get that fit, and then see what remainder we need to fill afterwards. Right, so this is what we got so far. You can see slight misalignment, so all I've got to do is just chop about 10mm or so off that top one, and then that should give me enough wiggle room to bring these up a bit to line up with the ones on the window there. Okay, I've given myself a couple of
data marks just in case it shifts for whatever reason when I'm removing the bottom ones. I'll also take this opportunity to mark the cable entry points on the back side of this wall so that they come through at a convenient place in the overhead cabinets. Okay, so here we are going to have a socket, and I've got a socket box that's going to go in here, and of course I want it to land right in the middle of this slat, but I also need to make sure I avoid the ribs behind because we're going to be very tight in order to fit this in. I might even need to cut some of them out. So what I'm going to do is drill through the back here, and then that will show me on this side whereabouts the stud is behind this, and then I can use those 2 drill points to measure out in order to fit in the rest of the box. Just about enough room. As you can see, I left a little bit of wiggle room on this, but it still keeps it within the trim at the side, so we can cut that out. How about that for a fit? So these are dry lining sockets that I'm using, and literally all you do is you snap those in either side. And when you tighten the faceplate up, what it does is it automatically pulls these clamps forward, so like that, and that is pulling this kind of outside rim into the face. So it's basically self-clamping. Amazing for this purpose.
It was at this point I really began to find my flow, as well as figure out a process of attaching the cladding that would allow me to install it in a relatively stress-free way. At least for simple sections like these walls, where it was just a case of cutting the cladding to size and install some socket boxes here and there. As before, these lines were then carried around the front of the shower and around the opposite wall where they would meet the sliding door, before then moving on to the back doors, where again I made every effort to ensure the cladding lined up when the doors were closed, as well as not intrude on any of the seals around the door. In the next video, I'll be focusing on the bulkhead storage and cabinetry, and don't forget that if you want to see a more detailed overview of any of the steps I've covered in this video, or the van conversion as a whole for that matter, check out my new dedicated van channel linked in the description below. I hope you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.